Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Pomeranz. I'm Deputy Director here of the Kennan Institute, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our panel on U.S.-China relations as seen through the Russian prism. We are greatly honored to have two leading experts on that subject. Our main speaker today will be Fyodor Lukyanov, who is Editor-in-Chief of the Russia and Global Affairs Journal, published in Russian and English with participation of Foreign Affairs. He's worked as a correspondent, a commentator, and editor for numerous Russian printed and electronic media. He is an international columnist for such Russian publications as Vedomosti and Kommersant, a member of the Presidium of Council on Foreign and Defense Policy. He is also a member of the expert board of RIA Novosti. He graduated from Moscow State University in 1991 and holds a degree in Germanic languages. Mr. Lukyanov's talk will be followed by a commentary by Bruce Parrott, who is currently professor and director of the Russian and Eurasian Studies program at Johns Hopkins University School for Advanced International Studies. Dr. Parrott has been a consultant to the U.S. State and Defense Departments. He is the author of numerous publications and articles as well. He received his PhD in political science from Columbia University. So without much further ado, Mr. Lukyanov, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm extremely grateful to be here because this is a very important and very interesting topic and such unqualified and distinguished audience. So my gratitude to Woodrow Wilson Center. When I got invitation by email, so I spent some minutes to consider how to interpret that Russia is counted among Asian countries in this program, Asian views. But soon I came to the conclusion that it's very, very positive, because that means that Russia matters still in international relations, as we see gradual but quite rapid strategic disappearance of Europe from radar screen. Asia becomes most important area for the whole world, and of course Russia should be part of this big development. Russian identity used to be split between European and non-European sentiments since several centuries, probably since Peter the Great time. Now situation is even worse because 2/3 of country's territory is in Asia, but 3/4 of country's population is in Europe. And of course, from the point of view of mentality, of culture, of world view, Russia is an absolutely typical European country, European post-empire, and a stage of decline. But at the same time, being present in Asia, Russia can't but to try to develop a strategy in that part of the world. Traditional Russian foreign policy approach used to be entirely West-centric, which does not mean it was pro-Western, because in the Soviet Union time, of course, it was a big confrontation. In the post-Soviet time, we had different zigzags in our relationship with both United States and the European Union. But the West used to serve as a reference point for any Russian speculations and discussions about foreign policy. Not anymore, because it looks like senseless to try to still fight struggles in our relationship with Western powers, struggles which basically are inherited from the previous period. most of controversies we have are due to unsettled issues after the Cold War. And they become more and more irrelevant to international environment and to development both in Russia and in the West. This year, in my mind, was a crucial turning point in Russian foreign policy thinking. When I say foreign policy thinking, I actually try to summarize what is going on without good chances to find a comprehensive view, because despite certain authoritarian trends in Russian political system, we have an enormous variety of views, and in terms of assessment of foreign policy, there is even more pluralistic society than the United States. But my job is, as editor of Foreign Policy Journal, is just to try to figure out the atmosphere of current debate. And my feeling now is that there is really a beginning of a new era in Russian foreign policy, due to a couple of reasons. First, this major strategic shift of international focus to Asia, and this is crucially important to Russia. Second, since collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia lost its global ambitions, of course, and now I would say there is a more or less accepted by everybody understanding that Russia will never more become world power, the superpower. But between early 90s and very recently, Russia struggled for a restoration of certain status in international affairs, mainly in the area of the post-Soviet, former Soviet Union. The peak of this development was, of course, war in Caucasus, August 2008, which played a very important psychological role. I will not go into discussion about reasons and consequences of that war, but in terms of psychology, it was very important for Russia, because Russian establishment and the big part of Russian nation could say that now Russia can say no. And that was reaction to many years of strategic retreat since since even late 80s until this period. And many people thought in the West thought after Georgian War that Russia now will start so to say expansionist foreign policy, will try to restore something like a Soviet Union. In fact, the opposite happened. That was peak, and psychologically Russia was satisfied, and in terms of practical capacities, Georgian War, of course, showed that capacities are extremely limited. To defeat Georgia, that's one thing, but to try to use economic, military, political means to restore former empire, it's absolutely no chance, and there is not. It's even not controversial more in Russia, so it's more or less accepted. That's one reason. Second reason is that growth of China, growth of Chinese economic and political influence on the international scene is gradually becoming a dominant factor in Russian foreign policy. In July this year, President Medvedev called a big meeting in Khabarovsk, in Siberia, in eastern part of Russia, to discuss how to formulate a comprehensive strategy which would combine development of Russian Far East, economic development of Russian Far East, and Russian strategy in broader Asia, foreign policy in broader Asia. And that was basically the first attempt to try to outline such a strategy. And since that, discussion about Asian vector is very much widespread and popular in Russian political community. More than that, in a speech delivered recently, also in July, at Russian Foreign Ministry, President Medvedev, for the first time, mentioned Asia-Pacific among hypothetical or possible sources for Russian modernization. And this is very, very important shift, because modernization in Russian tradition used to be connected only to Europe or to the United States also, but mainly to Europe. And for the first time, and there is a recognition in Russian society that Russia now is surrounded by countries, both in Europe and in Asia, surrounded by countries which are developing faster and more efficient than Russia itself. And that will have profound impact on the whole political thinking. Russia and the United States, in a way, share similar problem regarding China from completely different angles. But both for Washington and Moscow, there is unclear how to deal with China in the future. Because those models you here in the United States and we there in Moscow used to apply to relationship with China, they don't work anymore. U.S.-China relationship now and in the foreseeable future will probably be the most important international factor for Russian development. This is a framework which will be set by those relationships, and Russia will try to adapt itself to this framework. On the one hand, Russian approach until recently, again, now is changing, but until recently was to try to counterbalance American influence, to counterbalance American and NATO and the West's expansion in the former, in Europe generally, and especially in the former Soviet area. And to try to stop that, or to try to counterbalance that, Russia considered China as a major political actor in this context, because, of course, in terms of global views, Russian and Chinese perceptions of international relations are quite close. The notion of multipolarity, multipolar world, are circulating both in Moscow and in Beijing since mid-90s, but in a way it used to be just a theoretical concept. Later on, this theoretical concept turned into economic reality, because many people, many experts in Russia, and not only there, consider that current development in world economy is not only globalization, universal globalization, but also a restructuring of the global system according to the centers of economic gravity, according to so to say, poles, which consolidate any territories or spheres of economic interest around themselves. And in this regard, China is at least a natural pole in Asia, and Russia theoretically can serve as such a pole in the post-Soviet era, and is trying to do that. United States is different, because United States is still the only country which still have entirely global vision and global ambitions, and it will be very, very difficult to try to build in American vision into this interaction of different poles. And in this regard, Russian and Chinese interests are coinciding. But if we go down from this global level to regional and especially to local levels, then we see growing discontent between Moscow and Beijing, because on the regional level, the main area of interaction is Central Asia, and until certain period, until mid 2000s, Russia and China were very much preoccupied with the American military presence in that area, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the main structure in this part of the world, issued 2005 a strong statement asking United States how long it intends to stay in this area. Since that situation has changed, and not because Russia and China started to love American military presence, but because it became quite clear that interest or intentions which Russia and China have inside Shanghai Cooperation Organization are not coinciding, at least not completely. Russia, which still have serious strategic potential, military potential, would like to turn Shanghai Cooperation Organization into more strategic-oriented grouping, especially given that fact that development both in Central Asia and Afghanistan shows that such kind of grouping, such kind of structure with security capacities would be very much needed in this area, especially after NATO operation will be completed in one or another way. But Chinese understanding of Shanghai Cooperation Organization is quite different, because China is not very much eager to get involved into any political and strategic alliances with clear commitments and obligations. For China, Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a good way to promote Chinese economy, promote Chinese export in that area. And that area is traditionally seen by Russia as a sphere of Russian backyard. And reasons are obvious, because Russia was present in that region for many centuries. Interestingly, China is not challenging that perception, and China is not claiming any political role there. And when Russia expresses discontent with Chinese growing economic presence, the Chinese response is very logical, but this is normal economic competition. You are not barred from being as active there as we are, so why not work together? But as Russian economic potential, of course, is much weaker now than Chinese, so there is no chance for Russia to really compete. So there is I wouldn't say there is a conflict, but there is a growing difference in strategic priorities. But when we go down to the local level, to bilateral level, then it's even more complicated. On the one hand, Russia is not perceiving China as a military threat, and even traditional fears, I would even say panic fears, which were circulating in Russian political corridors and in Russian society a couple of years ago, about millions of Chinese who will come to occupy Siberia, Far East, and take that from Russian sovereignty. Those fears were very much politically motivated and exaggerated, but now they are calming down. It's quite interesting that it's still such kind of discourse, but on two margins of political field. On the one hand, extreme liberals used to say that Chinese will take the whole Siberia. That's why we need to immediately sign military alliance with the United States. And on the other hand, there are extreme nationalists and conservatives saying that Chinese menace is the worst to us, so we need to strengthen our military capacity in that area and bear Chinese from coming to Russia. But the major part of political establishment is now very relaxed. I don't know why. Maybe it's a sign of final desperation, or maybe it's understanding that this problem should be addressed in different ways. Anyway, there is now very officially optimistic view on possibilities of economic cooperation in Asia. In terms of presence of Chinese, for example, labor force and Chinese capital, Chinese investment. Unfortunately, the main problem is not in China or not in the West. The main problem is inside Russia, because when you talk to people living in those areas, in areas bordering to China, their argument usually is that we need them. We have no labor force, we have no money, Moscow has abandoned us completely, so if not federal center of Russian Federation, then somebody should care about those territories. Why not Chinese? Problem is that Chinese business, as any other business from any country, from Europe, from US, from Singapore, from South Korea, needs some clear rules and investment climate, which is understandable, which is not the case in Russia. And what we have now, that part of Chinese business is coming to invest or to work in Russia, that part which uses all problems of Russian development, first of all corruption, smuggling, illegal migration, and so. And that's not because China is very much interested just in this kind of activities, but other activities prefer better places, and those activities they use opportunities provided by Russian side. Anyway, there is a growing understanding that not military supremacy, not demographic expansion, not even any political territorial claims, which are also under discussion between Russia and China since many years, not officially, because officially we have completed solved all problems, and there are no territorial twists between Russia and China, but historically different claims can be raised. Anyway, the main problem, as it's seen in Moscow now, is growing disbalance in economic development between Asian part of Russia and China, but not only China, also Asia at large. And how to address that? That, in my mind, and of course, in the middle term to long term perspective, that can pose a political problem, because if big part of Russian territory will de facto be under economic influence of China, then political sovereignty sooner or later will start to be questioned, maybe not officially, but in a way. This can start to change the whole prism through which Russia looks at foreign policy and at the outside world, because US role and other Asian countries' role might be very positive in this regard. One of new signs in Russian foreign policy discussion is that, of course, we need excellent relationship with China. We can't afford to have bad relationship with China. But we need to diversify our relationship in Asia as broad as possible, to have as many different partners as possible, not to focus entirely on China and not to become dependent on China. Of course, first of all, it's quite interesting that now Russian political and diplomatic elite is very eager to visit all events organized by ASEAN. ASEAN is seen as a very, very positive and progressive and successful organization. South Korea is seen as a natural, not counterweight, but at least natural supplement to relationship with China. Japan as well, but this direction is limited by territorial problem, and this is quite a problematic future. And the United States, because in Asia, despite official claims that security architecture in Asia is outdated and reflects realities of the Cold War, and those statements by foreign ministry, for example, means, of course, U.S. alliances with South Korea and Japan. But in fact, Russian perception of American presence in Asia is very much different than Russian perception of American presence somewhere else, for example, in Europe or in the post-Soviet area, because there is an understanding that maybe being weaker partner of in Asian politics, Russia will need additional not alliances, but additional contacts, additional links, and in this regard, U.S. presence, including military presence, might be part of the game. Not necessarily Russia. Of course, Russia will not rush into any alliances in Asia with the United States, but that will serve as an important factor to counterbalance Chinese supremacy. To conclude, I can say that there is really a completely new kind of discussion about Asia in Russian expert community and even in Russian political community. I would say there is a discussion which reflects much more realistic approach to things than it sometimes happens in a Russian debate with Europe and the United States on different topics. Asia might become basics for new relationship with the United States as well, because the problem of Russia-US relations now is that reset policy launched by the current administration, in my mind, that was very, very successful policy, and parts actually, hopefully the START treaty will be ratified soon in Senate, and then the whole program of reset will be completed. So both sides will achieve all initial goals. And that's excellent. But this time is over. And reset was very good to relaunch relationship. But now we need completely different agenda, which would not be rooted in realities of the Cold War, which is the case with reset now, but should refer to the completely new world situation. And that means that in the centerpiece of that will be probably Asia-Pacific, because you can't anymore expect Russian-American arms control talks to be centerpiece of international relationship, not now and not in the future. By the way, one of points which is very popular now in Russia is that any future discussions about arms control after START 3 can't be bilateral. They should include other nuclear powers, first of all China, but the rest as well, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to continue. So I think that we were witnessing a reorientation of Russian foreign policy. Still big confusion, but Chinese factor will be main reference point for any further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fyodor. We'll turn Bruce.
Thank you very much, Will. I want to begin by thanking Fyodor Lukyanov and Doug Spellman, the Deputy Director of the Kissinger Institute, for providing the paper well in advance so that I could read it and think about it. Nothing is more difficult than to find out the contents of a paper when one is on the podium, so I really appreciate having a chance to read the paper and reflect on it. Let me raise a few issues and address a couple of questions to Mr. Lukyanov. Let me start by saying something about the post-Cold War international system and the problem of adaptation of that system by the United States, China, and Russia. Then let me say something more about Russian adaptation and then pose a few questions. The title of the paper talks about an uncertain international environment, and I think I agree with the paper that this environment is still deeply uncertain. As a Sovietologist, of course, I had a large amount of uncertainty injected into my life with the breakup of the Soviet Union. But people who study the international system also had a lot of uncertainty injected into their lives, and I'm not certain that the uncertainty has completely lifted yet. What were the lessons of the Cold War? What elements of the Cold War system have fallen away? What elements have persisted, and what are the new elements? These are basic questions, and the fact that they're 20 years old doesn't mean that they have been overtaken by events. William Faulkner said, "The past is not dead, it's not even past." And the key issue for us is what elements of the Cold War past really have disappeared. Now a few words about the adaptation of the three countries to this post-Cold War system, whatever the system may be exactly. I think when we talk about the three countries, we can think about their ambitions or objectives on the one hand and the means they have for achieving those ambitions or objectives on the other. Clearly, the biggest change is in the case of China, which has enormous new potential, which it didn't have 10 or 15 years ago. And we know that China's means have changed, but we're not sure how its objectives are going to change. We know the declaratory policy of China, but the much harder question is to calculate how China will behave in 5 or 10 years when its capacities change. This is an old point of argumentation among students of international relations. Do you talk about capabilities or do you talk about intentions? Robert Jervis has pointed out that sometimes the leaders of a country can't foresee how they themselves will behave, let alone how their successors will behave under new circumstances. And that's one of the reasons I think the rise of China is such a difficult intellectual problem and policy problem for other countries. The case of the United States, as Mr. Lukyanov indicates, still has very large ambitions and doesn't really want to give those ambitions up. But and one of the things he mentions is the reduction of the U.S. interest in the quote-unquote old world. I think it's an important issue to discuss how much there's shift from Europe or the old world, how far it's moved toward Asia. But in any case, the U.S. has very large ambitions, but its means are stretched thin to satisfy those ambitions. The U.S. is a military superpower, but it's not an economic superpower, as Joseph Nye has pointed out. And if it's true that economic resources are an increasingly important instrument of foreign relations, then the U.S. status as a superpower is in question. Its soft power has also been dramatically tarnished in the past decade. Not least, the long-term competitiveness of the United States is in question. Since the financial crisis, it seems to me, we have become aware of the impact of domestic economic weaknesses on our foreign relations, including now our military budget, where we have clearly surpassed the rest of the world. So part of what matters is how our economy is going to perform in the future and what kind of foreign policy initiatives this will make possible. Asia on the whole has come out of the economic crisis much better than the United States or Europe, so this could accentuate the shift of initiative toward Asia. In the case of Russia, there has been a dramatic shrinkage of means, which Mr. Lukyanov indicated and itemized. The question in my mind is what has the change in Russian ambitions been as complete as he suggests. At one point in his paper, he says, Russia is one of the few remaining countries in the world today that possess classical strategic thinking skills and the capacity and ability to use force. This suggests that Russia hasn't followed what we might call the post-Cold War European path, which is to pull in its perimeter and rely on non-military means of diplomacy. The question is, how much has it really shrunk its global ambitions? The paper says, after 1991, Russia lost its global ambitions. And I think compared with the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 80s, it clearly has lost global ambitions. Gromyko was famously quoted as saying that nothing anywhere in the world could be decided without Soviet involvement. I don't think Russia sees the world that way. But has it lost its continental Eurasian ambitions? And there I think there's a matter for discussion. That's one reason the idea in the 1990s of making Russia a normal country was so unappealing to many members of the Russian elite, because they didn't want it to become a normal European country or an ordinary country in any other sense. The problem is that Russia does not have adequate means to pursue its ambitions effectively. And we can look at this on several levels. One is the fate of economic reform in the 1990s. There was an improvement in economic performance and economic reform in the early 2000s, but since then I think there has been a regression. Another is the so-called resource curse of oil and gas supplies, which inhibit economic reform. And paradoxically, a third barrier is Russia's nuclear arsenal, because that arsenal serves as a deterrent to foreign aggression, and it therefore is a deterrent or an obstacle to domestic reforms adopted on national security grounds. If Russia didn't have nuclear weapons, the case for radical domestic economic and political reform would be stronger. Russia's problems in the divergence between ambitions and means, I think, have been especially large in Asia, because it lacks economic facilities and population resources in eastern regions. In this respect, it's in a much more difficult situation than China or the United States, which could shift resources and interests from one coast or one part of their perimeter to another, because the space in Russia is so enormous and the maldistribution of population and economic resources is so large. Precisely because there have been such dramatic cuts in Russia's military forces in the past 20 years, its relative position in Asia has weakened, because it depended in Asia even more on military forces to be taken into account than it did in Europe. So it seems to me there's a very serious structural problem that the country has to come to grips with. And multi-level engagement with Asia on various economic, diplomatic, and cultural grounds or demographic grounds is going to be very difficult. Energy supply may be a partial answer to this problem, but only a partial one. And it's also possible to misplay this card and to lose out to Central Asian and other suppliers. So in closing, I think I guess if there's one question I have in mind, it is, how new is this new stage of Russian development? It may well be new, and I would be delighted if it were. But Russia has been talking about, or Moscow has been talking about economic engagement with Asia since the 1970s, if not longer. And the question is it more capable of doing that now than it was in the 1970s or 1980s under Mikhail Gorbachev? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Fyodor, you can take your shot at the first question. The question that Bruce just raised about to what extent is the new policy actually new?
I think you're absolutely right that Russian capacity to engage with Asia is now even probably worse than in 70s or under Gorbachev. But at the same time, I'm more convinced now, not because of Russian capacity, but because of profound change in the whole environment. Because Russia can't afford anymore to be non-present in Russian economy, in Asian economy. And recently I saw a figure which is fantastic. Russia is the biggest reservoir of natural gas in the world, Russian share in Asian gas supply is 0.002. So it's nonsense. So with all respect to Europe, it's nonsense that almost all Russian resources go only at that direction.
Well, we have time for some questions, so right in front here. Wait one second, we'll get a microphone to you.
Gil Rosman. The test I've been wondering about for this critical question, is Russia resetting its Asian vector this year? First was the Chonan incident and the Russian inspection team, and recently the visit by Im Myung-bak, the president of South Korea, and also the hopes and then the frustrations with the Hatoyama claim that he was really going to improve ties with Russia this year. And so is there a sign that the movement with Japan, South Korea, and the response to the North Korean issue are indicative that Russia can separate itself from China, or is Russia still essentially relying on China as its gateway to Asia, and all of the rest of this is more or less minor economic activity, but with no expectation that Russia really has another partner of significance in this area?
I think it's too early to say that Russia is trying to separate itself from Chinese course. Maybe later, but not yet. What Russia is trying to do is to revitalize any relations, because of course with South Korea, with Japan, we have since a very long time, since Gorbachev, we have a lot of exchanges, but nothing practical happens. And there is an attempt to show that Russia is really interested. And this is, in my understanding, this is the consequence of President Medvedev's personal engagement in that, and this big gathering in Khabarovsk. As for South Korea's president and Mr. Hatoyama's presence at Yaroslavl political forum recently, and they delivered speeches, that was very funny because as I understand, the Kremlin administration wanted to have any top guests. And the only who in Europe who expressed his wish was Mr. Berlusconi, our old friend, but a little bit. We need some more. And then I went to Asia, and suddenly two quite high-ranking officials, Hatoyama non-official, but anyway, came and they spoke. They spoke about modernization, by the way. Berlusconi spoke about everything, but they delivered interesting speeches about modernization, and I think it's a little bit funny, but there is very, very interesting sign.
Right here.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jean with Voice of Vietnamese Americans. You just mentioned a very interesting point that the high officials Russia spoke about modernization in Asia. And I'd like to bring that to the triangle US, China, and Russia in Vietnam in the past and now. What is your vision of the roles of Russia back in Vietnam now in that triangle, if they can be used as a buffer, a balance factor, and bring Vietnam into a smooth transition between communist and current problems with China into a modernized country that join other countries and stabilize the region? Thank you.
I'm not sure that Russia has big strategy vis-à-vis Vietnam, and would like to play a political role there. So maybe not to my knowledge, and I think that Russia is not very well situated just now to do that. What is obvious with Putin and now with Medvedev, they are trying to restore ties which were completely abandoned in 90s because of different reasons, partly because of political stupidity, partly because of economic collapse. And Vietnam, as a rapidly developing country, emerging country, of course is very important, because I think we still have a very good memory in Russia about Vietnam, and hopefully in Vietnam about Russia. So there is mainly economic. There is attempt to strengthen economic ties all over the world, and countries like Vietnam are not controversial like Iran or Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Nadia Chow with the Liberty Times. This morning, many participants mentioned that most country in Asia doesn't want to see U.S.-China relationship become too warm, not too cold either, even a confrontation. I wonder, from Russia's point of view, is that a good definition for your point of view?
I think it's applicable to Russia as well. I was fascinated by the discussion at the Japanese panel about a reaction on G2 in Japan, because to a little extent it was similar to Russian reaction, very initial reaction on that, because when Mr. Brzezinski came with, and Mr. Kissinger came with that idea, in Russia some, especially liberal commentators, started to say that, look, China and the US will build a condominium, and Russia, with all our corruption and unreformed economy, will just disappear. But that was a very short period of discussion, and the main view was that it was just a trick to test reactions, nothing serious. And basically, I think that was. So I don't see any fear in Russia about U.S.-Chinese rapprochement, because in Russia people understand much better, maybe than in the West, how huge is mental difference between Chinese mind and an American mind. So any formal alliance is just impossible. As for confrontation, I think in 90s and maybe early this decade, some people would say that confrontation between China and US would be good for Russia. Not anymore, because now the worst scenario for Russia would be to get involved in this confrontation when two sides, hypothetical confrontation, when two sides will try to attract Russia and to use it against each other, because that will be completely disastrous for Russia. So I think that this description of Asian perception of US-China relationship is more or less relevant to us as well.
Stanley Kober with the Cato Institute. Mr. Lukyanov mentioned that Russia and China have different perceptions of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that Russia is more like, wants to see it as a budding military alliance, but China just sees it as an economic entity. But yet they hold military exercises together. In fact, right now they're holding a military exercise together in Kazakhstan. And when I read the Chinese press, I mean, they boast about the military participation of the Chinese forces in these exercises. And so I just want to clarify this, because I'm not seeing, the greater economic, I'm sure that's there, but they are talking up the military cooperation with Russia in these exercises.
Yeah, military cooperation is there in a very limited scale. Exercises always. There is a very good way to demonstrate good relationship, solidarity. In terms of threats and challenges, Russia and China are almost completely different. So we have different priorities. I don't see any practical continuation of this military cooperation, because fears that Shanghai Cooperation Organization will become a unit to challenge the United States which were quite widespread a couple of years ago. Now I don't think so. It's not an interest of China. It's even not an interest of Russia anymore in that area. So as symbolic move to show how close Russia and China are now politically, military cooperation is good. But even in terms of arms sales, which used to be very important, actually centerpiece for Russian-Chinese relationship in the 90s and early this decade, not the case anymore because China bought everything it wanted. What China wants now, Russia doesn't want to sell because it's too sophisticated. And China is not interested anymore in Russia as a major partner. So Russia is turning more to India or to some other customers. So I don't see any ground for Russian-Chinese military cooperation, real cooperation, not symbolic but real.
Hi, John Parker from the National Defense University. Another question about military exercises. You said that the near panic of several years ago over the demographic, economic imbalances in the Far East has been receding, and that in Moscow, at least, there's a more relaxed attitude now towards the challenges Russia faces in the Far East with China. Within that context, I wonder if you would comment on the recent Vostok 2010 exercise, the largest exercise Russia has done since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and one that ended up with a nuclear exchange at the very end.
You mean it could end up with nuclear exchange, or you mean a scenario of scenario? No, that's exactly to follow up the previous question. So the military cooperation with China will continue, but I wouldn't say that China and Russia are completely. So as Bruce said, the intentions and capabilities are slightly different things. I don't believe that somebody in Russia intends to attack China or somebody in China does. But to strengthen capabilities is always a good thing. So China is doing that in military field. Russia, again, as I fully agree with Bruce, that in Asia, Russia is extremely weak in all other components of force. So economic, demographic, political. So military force is the only mean. And you need to remind sometimes that there is still available not only to China but theoretically to all involved, to all present in that region. So.
Thank you. Hi, Chang Zhu with Legal Daily China. My question related to the North Korea thing. Recently, U.S. and China couldn't reach a conclusion on how to deal with North Korea. By U.S. Rejected, the 3 steps proposal from China, and also didn't agree that the proposal on building up a kind of regional peace mechanism. So I wonder how the stance or views from the Russian government, and is there any constructive proposal from Russian side? Thank you.
Mr. Putin started his career as a president, an international career as a president, basically from with visit to Pyongyang early 2000 to meet Kim Jong-il to discuss things, and then he went to G8 summit in Japan to report about that, and it looked like Russia was very successful in engaging North Korea. 2 months after that, Mr. Kim Jong-il, talking to South Korean journalists, said that Putin believed what I said, but basically I joked. So he has bad sense of humor. And after that, Mr. Kim Jong-il visited Russia, I think, 2 times with the railway through the whole country. But I'm afraid that Russia is not, has not so many instruments to influence North Korea. Of course, not so many as China. China has, and China is a key player there. What Russia is trying to say all the time that North Korea is such a special kind of regime that the more you press, the worse. And those people, if they get desperate, they can do really anything, unlike Iran, which is different from Russian point of view. And recently, in the last issue of our journal, we just published an article by a Russian scholar arguing exactly that it's absolutely senseless to try to press Pyongyang, because it's just the opposite effect. But of course, it's mainly Chinese and American game. It's Russia can support something, but very little. You wanted to?
Okay. I just want to pick up on a theme that you mentioned at the beginning of your talk, and that was the realization, at least amongst Russian elites, that it's no longer going to be a global power, and it has changed its expectations as to its role in the world. I'm just curious to what extent that they've actually begun telling that message to the Russian people themselves. Have they, because one gets the impression that they're still kind of at least emphasizing the notion of a regional power. And so to what extent are the kind of elites bracing Russians for a different role in the world, one that follows a more sophisticated approach that you've described, but one that is essentially more reactive and not setting the agenda?
Russian public opinion, of course, is very much split, and it used to be very nostalgic. But now it's this year, next year it's 20 years since Soviet Union collapsed. And again, the Georgian war played, in this regard, very, very important role to show for public opinion that Russia has some, symbolically can resist United States expansion as Georgian and Ukrainian NATO moves were perceived. Depending what you ask people, you can get any answers. You can get answer that majority wants Russia to be great power, but if you formulate in a slightly different way, so majority would like Russia to be a normal power, so with the normal life for citizens. And the advantage with the Russian political system is that if you control television, you basically can change public opinion very soon. So if a political elite decides that now we need to, so to say, reorientate our population, then I think 2-3 weeks of very good TV coverage will be enough.
Any last questions?
Well, could I ask one question?
Please go ahead.
Hyori, you talked about sort of residual concerns about territorial claims from the Chinese side. Would you say that there are in Chinese historical publications or other perhaps nationalist circles still residual sentiments that part of the territorial settlement achieved under Putin was illegitimate and that those are still Chinese lands? And how would you say Russian observers interpret Chinese or informal sentiments about these questions?
I would say there are a lot of mythology in Russia about this topic, because you can almost every week find some publications arguing that there are such secret memorandum by Mao Zedong saying that all Russian territories to Urals is Chinese, and some analysts arguing that they know exactly the hidden debate behind it for domestic reasons. It's basically around those so-called unequal treaties of the 19th century. But I think that why Russia decided to complete all official territorial claims a couple of years ago, which was perceived not very positively in Russian public opinion, because in Khabarovsk region, in Amur region, they're still very, very nervous about that. But I think that was a very right move by Russian side, that if you have a counterpart which in 10 or 15 years' time will be twice as big as now economically, then it's better to conclude negotiations now than try to prolong them. And this is unfortunately a big difference with Japan, because in Japanese case, people in Russia don't expect big rise, and then why we are not in a hurry, so to say.
Mm-hmm. We've run out of time, so I'd like to thank our speaker very much for his excellent presentation and our discussion. Thank you for attending, and we'll reconvene at 3 o'clock, so in about 15 minutes. Thanks very much.